Just to put a perspective on this, 9/11, which so many of us lived through in this state and in this nation, 2,753 lives lost. This crisis, we've lost 6,268 New Yorkers.
I'm Julie Pace, Washington Bureau Chief for the Associated Press, and this is Ground Game. The coronavirus pandemic ranks among one of the most consequential stories ever covered by the Associated Press in its 170-year history. Here to take you inside the outbreak is AP's Ralph Russo.
Happening on the landline. Cascade Avenue, channel number 1997. Could be a female, difficulty breathing, can't speak in full sentences, has pneumonia.
From the Associated Press, this is Inside the Outbreak. I'm Ralph Russo. Today is Thursday, April 9th. This is Holy Thursday for Christians who celebrate Easter, the beginning of a long holiday weekend for many around the world. But with a global pandemic raging and death tolls growing in Britain and the United States, government and health officials are warning that hard-won gains in the fight against the coronavirus must not be jeopardized by relaxing social distancing. Today on Inside the Outbreak, I'll talk with 3 AP journalists who have been working on a project called 24 Hours, The Fight for New York. The reporting was done on Monday, April 6th, as the city was anticipating a surging death toll. Brian Mahoney, Jake Seiner, and Deepti Hajela spoke to New Yorkers in various walks of life. A funeral director, a Broadway actor.
I don't mind, 'cause you mean so much to me, ain't too proud to beg. Come see the show, ain't too proud when we're up, please, oh my God.
Taxi driver, paramedic.
I hate the phrase, we know what we signed up for, because as much as we may have known, we didn't know this. We haven't seen this. No one has seen this. But we know why we signed up for this.
Bodega owner.
We cut half of the staff. It's been ghost town. Like, a lot of people used to come in.
To find out how they are coping in a city under siege by COVID-19. Let me go around the virtual table here and introduce my guest. Deepti Hajela is a AP reporter based in New York. She covers immigration and breaking news. Thank you very much for joining me, Deepti.
Hello.
Jake Seiner and Brian Mahoney, much like me, are repurposed sports reporters who have been moved onto the news side to bolster pandemic coverage here in New York City. Jake, thank you for hopping on the show.
Sure.
And hello, Brian. How are you?
I'm good, Ralph. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I'm going to start with Deepti here, and it's a broad question. What was the overarching goal of this project?
To really, I think, give a window to just what people are going through and how they are trying to get through this incredibly difficult time in all different stages. The people who are on the front lines, obviously, but also just, the people who make New York what it is on a regular day, how they're trying to get by.
Yeah, as someone who lives here, it has been pretty remarkable to see all the different ways it impacts you just, again, on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so let's go around and hear some stories. It's almost hard to pick one because they're all so fascinating, but I'll start with you, Jake. You spoke with a funeral home director. What has his life been like?
Yeah, Jesus Pujols is a 23-year-old funeral director, works mostly out of Brooklyn. His primary job is as an undertaker. It means when somebody dies, whether it's at a hospital or in a home, it's his job to go and gather the remains, deliver them to the funeral home where they can be prepared, whether it's for burial or cremation, however the family wants to say goodbye. His life right now is just basically existing in his minivan. When we spoke to him Monday, his workday had actually started at 8:30 a.m. on Sunday. He worked until 4:30 Monday morning, got home, slept for a few hours. He woke up to a phone call at 11:30. Monday was supposed to be his day off of work. Instead, he got a phone call from a friend who had an uncle who passed away in Valhalla, New York, which is about an hour north of Brooklyn. He got in his van, made the hour drive up, picked up the body, drove it back to a funeral home in Brooklyn. That's where we finally caught up with him in the afternoon. He's exhausted. He's working 80 plus hours every week. He's really frustrated with what he's seeing in hospitals. He had an experience not on Monday, but a few days prior. He went to the same hospital 3 times, just trying to locate the same body. The paperwork wasn't right. He was showing up and they were saying that this person wasn't, in their logbook as dead. And finally, on the 3rd visit, they figured out the person was still in the ICU. There's this organization at some hospitals. He's been stepping into these refrigerated trailers that have been used for, makeshift morgues at the hospitals, and they're just bodies on floors and body bags, and he's stepping over them, just searching frantically for somebody's loved one that he's been charged with helping get that person to their final destination. And one thing that really stuck out to me, I caught up with him and we spoke in person Monday afternoon. And Monday was a beautiful day. It was sunny. And we could see out the doors of the funeral home where we were talking, people out walking, some of them not wearing face masks, some of them not necessarily practicing social distancing, some of them running, taking in the sunny day. And that just infuriated him because he's on the final lines of this. He sees the damage that the coronavirus is doing to his city. And I think the biggest thing for him is just that frustration of knowing that he's doing all this work and there are people who just aren't respecting his work by taking the measures being recommended to them seriously. And that was the thing that really stuck with me, is just how that frustration really showed through.
So, Deepti, you caught up with somebody who's not necessarily on the front lines. And as a lot of us, we've had our lives turned upside down while not being infected, avoiding sickness, but nonetheless are still very much affected by, the pandemic and the virus. You caught up with a stage actor. What is he doing with Broadway shut down?
So there's been a lot of trying to cope, right? I think he said, the first couple of weeks, he was able to kind of frame it in his head as like, oh, okay, here's a staycation. I'll be able to handle it. But as this has gone on, it's obviously gotten harder for him and for us all. So he's connecting with friends, connecting with his fellow castmates, and trying not to worry, but having some concerns about what this is going to mean for Broadway, for live events on the other side.
So, Brian, you spoke with a taxi driver, a paramedic, 2 different sides of this. A paramedic, again, more frontline, taxi driver,
it's
someone
one who is,
I would imagine is finding it harder to get a little work.
Before, obviously, in the paramedic.
When you look at those 2 situations,
who
give me a little compare and contrast.
As far as a paramedic, Travis was saying, his calls now have not only basically doubled and in some cases tripled, but they are doubling and tripling with all critical situations. These aren't just things you're going to treat and the person's going to be fine, maybe small injuries, that kind of thing. These are all try and get them to stay alive long enough to get to the hospital and hope when they get there, they can actually save them. And unfortunately, more often than not right now, he's finding that's not happening. So, his 12-hour shifts, he works 9 to 9, is now sometimes becoming 9 to 1 in the morning. We have first responders now who are getting sick. So they're calling in sick and he's working overtime and just adding on to these calls. On Monday, when we reported this story, he didn't have to work overtime, but he did 12 calls in 12 hours, no downtime at all. And as far as a taxi driver, I spoke to him a couple times during the day. Basically, all he's trying to do right now is go to areas where there are hospitals or occasionally stores, because that's the only place people is. There are no, he used to start his day at the airport. There's no going to the airport now. There's no passengers coming off flights. There's no going to office buildings where people are coming out of work and hoping they're rushing off to the train station or to their kids' Little League game and they'll jump in the first cab they see. None of that is happening right now. So he's basically almost stopping his day earlier because there's nothing to hang on the streets for. There's no one coming out.
So, Jake, let me go back to you for a second, because we all, not all of us live in New York here, but we've all work in New York and spend a lot of our lives in New York in one way or the other, New York City in one way or the other. Having been part of this project, I wonder if you can sort of relate some of your own experiences with what you reported out. Sometimes I guess I feel like there's almost 2 different fights going on here, and it's easy at a certain point to sort of feel like this isn't affecting me directly from a personal experience. Did you get a sense of sometimes in reporting this out that you came a little closer to what's really going on out there? Because I guess, if you sit in your apartment, again, sometimes you feel like, well, I'm just, as Deepti said, it's just sort of a staycation.
Yeah, I think, and I've had an interesting experience with this because for the first 2 weeks that New York was in lockdown, I was still in the sports department trying to report what's happening primarily with Major League Baseball. And that was all work from home. I think there's a real feeling of helplessness too that a lot of people are feeling because it's the other person I talked to this was Sarah Haynes, who's a TV host she's co-hosting on The View right now. You want to be able to help. After 9/11 in New York City, a huge thing was that people were able to get together, be in that community, find ways to help, find things they could do. The best thing you can do right now, if you're in a position where you need to be working from home, is to just stay home. And that doesn't often feel like a lot. And so I think I felt that quite a bit, just that sort of guilt about this is all out there happening. The city is falling apart. And the best thing you can do is just nothing. Since shifting over to the news department to help with this story and some other stories, I spent actually a lot of time with a few different funeral directors. It does almost make me wish I could go back to the helplessness of staying at home, because seeing all of this firsthand, being in these funeral homes where you have 30 or 40 bodies being chilled by air conditioners just as these people are trying to do their best. And it's heartbreaking for them because these funeral directors, the gratitude that they get is being able to help people when they lose a loved one to say a satisfying goodbye. And because of social distancing, because of all the things that are coming due to the coronavirus, there is none of that. These funerals they're not a satisfying way to part with a loved one. They're makeshift and lonely, and in addition to all the hours and all just the heartbreaking moments of just standing in these rooms where there's all these bodies, like there's none of that gratitude you get from at least this was to help somebody say goodbye in a satisfying way to get that sense of closure. And I think that's the part that triggers the emotions for me as far as what I've been out and seeing.
Deepti, I want to go to you for my last question here. Just again, sort of more of a personal experience. You are connected to New York in a way a lot of people are, in that you commute to work normally. So not being able to do that, living in Jersey and sort of being forced to stay at home. I wonder how that's affected your life and your job. And also, I'm wondering if there are other people in your community who are sort of in this same spot where they've lost their connection to New York.
I think the community I live in, it's definitely one where people go into the city for work a lot. So I think there's probably a lot of people who are in this boat of, oh, right, I'm working, but not how I usually do it. And it's been, for me as a reporter, it's been difficult, right? I mean, I think on the one hand, obviously, out of concern for my family and my loved ones, I'm staying home and trying not to put myself at risk. And, hearing stories from family and friends of people who have been getting sick, of people who have been passing. So that is something that I'm like, okay, good, I will stay home. But right, as a reporter, it's difficult. It's difficult to know that there's only so much I can do, and that, thank God, there's technology and that allows for me to be able to do the reporting and the interviewing and to be able to write off the work that our fantastic photo and video colleagues who don't have a choice and who can't stay home and who are out there, they're getting the material that I can write off of that. So at least I'm grateful that I've been able to help and contribute and be part of our reporting team in that way.
Then I'll hit you with this one last one, Deepti. Then we've talked to a lot of reporters and thrown this out at them. When did you sort of realize the enormity of this story? I
think on a personal level, when I realized that my daughter's school was closing, and then I think when it was the kind of, it seemed like overnight shift, right? I think from a company level where they said, instead of, oh, if you want to work at home, you can, it became work at home unless you absolutely cannot. And that was the moment where I think seeing that written in email and on screen was a moment where it just really became clear of just how much of an upheaval that this was going to be.
Deepti Hajela, Brian Mahoney, Jake Seiner, thank you all for joining me today. Thank you all for your excellent reporting to try to give us a view into what's going on here in New York through many different lenses and through the eyes of many different people. Really appreciate you guys jumping on, and please stay healthy and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ralph.
Listeners, you can read the full stories of 24 Hours, The Fight for New York at apnews.com. Go there for continuing and comprehensive coverage of the pandemic from the Associated Press.
That's it for this episode of Ground Game. We'll be here every step of the way during this extraordinary moment in American politics and American life, giving you all the news you need to know. Be sure to tell a friend about us, and please subscribe on Apple Podcasts and leave us a review. Some of the details of our discussion may have changed by the time you hear this. For up-to-date developments on all of your news, head over to apnews.com.